Good morning, Foxes class, and welcome to our writing lesson for today. So today we are going to finish innovating the resolution of our story. Yesterday we wrote the first half of it, and today we are going to write that second half. So I would like the date, the LO in your book, please, and then if you could have a go at editing the first half of your resolution. The things that I would like you to look out for today are, did you remember a colon before your list in your list sentence? Did you remember commas within your list? And also have a check of your spellings for me. See if you have spelled all of your words correctly. Have a look at them. Do they look right? Or do you need to perhaps ask an adult for help, or maybe get a dictionary, or have a look online to check the spelling? So date, LO, and then have a go at editing, please. Okay, so just like every English lesson, we are going to do our story map. So you'll find the video on Thursday, the 7th of January. Have a practice of our story map. See if you can do those fantastic actions that you have been practicing along to it as well for me. Hopefully you know off by heart. So pause the video here for me and have a go at your story map. Okay, on to the second part of our resolution today. So yesterday we wrote the first part of our resolution. Today we are going to write the second part. Now I think before we start writing the second part of our resolution, we should definitely go back and read our first part, shouldn't we? Just to remind ourselves of what we had included. Let's see what we wrote together yesterday. Anxious, Mrs. Davis rushed to the resources room and slammed the door behind her. She couldn't believe she had used all of the tea bags and forgotten to replace them. Hastily, she had to make some new ones. Grabbing the biggest box she could find, she quickly started searching for ingredients. Bright red food colouring, a litre of PVA glue, and golden glitter. She placed the box on the floor and stirred it with all her might until it resembled tea leaves. Okay, so we'd got to the point where she had created something that looked like tea leaves, and now she's going to have to see if she can get away with giving it to the head teacher without her noticing. Let's just check my plan a minute to see what I had said I was going to include. Okay, if we have a look at my resolution, I'd already included my emotion comma sentence. I'd already included how they were going to create the lost item, and I had included as well a colon to introduce a list. So I have included all three of these things. Let's see what I could include next. Okay, we've got lots of speech here, so I'm going to put some speech within my writing today. I can see I've got some speech. I can see I've got a good synonym for said. Oh, I've got a lovely starter here with a smile, a good fronted adverbial. I'm going to see if I can put a fronted adverbial within my writing today. I've got another one here as well, to his amazement, and for a minute. So we've got some speech and some fronted adverbials that we are going to include. Now, would it make sense for Mrs. Davis to say to Mrs. House, "Medicine time, Grandma"? No, because she wasn't making medicine for a start, was she? She made a special tea. So I'm going to remember that indent. And then I'm going to start my speech with my inverted commas. What could Mrs. Davis say to Mrs. House? Could she maybe just say, "Here you go, here you are, here's that tea I promised you"? Well, any of those things would make sense, wouldn't they? So I think I might just say, "Here you are. What do I need at the end of my speech?" I think I'm going to put a comma today before my inverted commas. There we go. "Here you are," said Mrs. Davis. Oh, we're not going to put said, are we? "Here you are," exclaimed Mrs. Davis. "Here you are," replied Mrs. Davis. "Announced Mrs. Davis," maybe? I think "announced" might work. announced Mrs. Davis. Now I'm going to put a action at the end here because I haven't said what Mrs. Davis is doing. Here you are, announced Mrs. Davis, passing Mrs. House, perhaps her special mug that she kept her tea in, passing her a concoction that she hoped would resemble tea bags, passing her the homemade tea recipe. Let's have a think. I think maybe I might say, announced Mrs. Davis, passing Mrs. House her head teacher mug. Now I'm going to put some extra detail in here because I think that Mrs. Davis is feeling very nervous. I'm not going to write though Mrs. Davis was nervous. I'm going to show that she was nervous instead, using show, not tell. How do we know she might be nervous? What might her body be doing? Perhaps her hands are shaking, so I'm going to put her hands couldn't help but shake as she passed the mug across the desk. Oh, that is really going to intrigue the reader, isn't it? Using that show, not tell. Here you are, announced Mrs. Davis, passing her Mrs. House her head teacher mug. Her hands couldn't help but shake as she passed the mug across the desk. Maybe I might even put a rhetorical question here as well. Would Mrs. House realise what she had done? Here you are, announced Mrs. Davis, passing Mrs. House her head teacher mug. Her hands couldn't help but shake as she passed the mug across the desk. Would Mrs. House realise what she had done? Okay, so all of that is just instead of this first line here. I've put my speech, but I've added lots of extra detail to my paragraph to make sure that my reader has all of the information that they need. Okay, now Mrs. House is going to reply. Can you remember what we need to do when we've got a new speaker? New speaker means we need a, well done if you said new line. So I'm going to have my inverted commas and Mrs. House is going to reply something. Now remember, Mrs. House was a very nice character in our story, so she's not going to call her a lazy worm, is she? What might she reply instead? Let's have a think. I think she would say thank you, wouldn't she? Thank you, inverted commas, Mrs. House replied. There we go. Right, what am I missing in this sentence? Well done if you spotted that I need some punctuation before my inverted commas. I think just a simple comma would make the most sense here. Thank you, Mrs. House replied. Okay, so now we've got this fronted adverbial with a smile. Now, I don't think that Mrs. Davis is going to be smiling as she hands the tea. She's going to be a little bit worried. So what might happen to her instead? I could show that worry by saying, with a bead of sweat dripping down her forehead. With a bead of sweat dripping down her forehead. Now this is where I need some punctuation. If we have a look here, I've got a comma, so I'm going to need a comma as well. Now what is Mrs. Davis doing? With a bead of sweat dripping down her forehead, Mrs. Davis watched as Mrs. House. What's Mrs. House doing? As Mrs. House drank her drink. We can think of something a bit better than that, I think. As Mrs. House lifted the mug to her lips. Okay. To his amazement, thick black smoke began to escape from her nostrils. Now, this isn't what we said was going to happen to Mrs. House, was it? We said that perhaps her hair might turn blue. Okay, let's have a think then. I quite like that, to his amazement. Maybe I could change amazement though. Shock perhaps, to her amazement, to her horror, to her surprise. That could work, couldn't it? To her surprise. And again, I need that special punctuation, my comma. What's going to happen? To her surprise, Mrs. House's hair began to change colour. What am I going to write next? Mrs. House's hair began to change colour. Are we going to maybe introduce the colour that it changed to? To her surprise, Mrs. House's hair began to change colour. The blonde started turning a vibrant, I'm going to put this as like a bright colour, a vibrant blue. Goodness me. Now, do we think that Mrs. Davis is going to say anything as she watches this all unfold? I think she's probably just going to stand there watching, maybe open-mouthed if she's that amazed. I'm going to write Mrs. Davis stood watching, her mouth open and her heart racing. Okay, let's have a read so far and see what we have got. Here you are, announced Mrs. Davis, passing Mrs. House her head teacher mug. Her hand couldn't help but shake as she passed the mug across the desk. Would Mrs. House realize what she had done? Thank you, Mrs. House replied, with a bead of sweat dripping down her forehead. Mrs. Davis watched as Mrs. House lifted the mug to her lips. To her surprise, Mrs. House's hair began to change colour. The blonde started turning a vibrant blue. Mrs. Davis stood watching, her mouth open and her heart racing. I think we're going to need the head teacher saying something now. So she's got no idea that her hair is currently turning blue. So again, I've got a new speaker, so I need a new line. I'm beginning to speak, so I need my inverted commas. What might the head teacher say to Mrs. Davis? I think that perhaps she might say, oh, I needed that. It was delicious. And then I need to end my speech with my comma and my inverted commas. Smiled. I quite like smiled actually. I even like the sweetly as well, because Mrs. House is still being very kind and sweet. Oh, I needed that. It was delicious, smiled Mrs. House sweetly. I'm going to magpie that bit from our story map. And I think that is my paragraph completed, because I have done my resolution. I have said what happens when she has that new product, when she drinks that new tea, haven't I? So when you're writing the end of your resolution, you need to get up to the part where they've passed that lost item back to the person who thought they had lost it, whatever that might be, that they've actually had to create a new version of it, like we have done in our story. Let's read it one more time before you have a go at writing your own. Here you are, announced Mrs. Davis, passing Mrs. House her head teacher mug. Her hands couldn't help but shake as she passed the mug across the desk. Would Mrs. House realize what she had done? Thank you, Mrs. House replied. With a bead of sweat dripping down her forehead, Mrs. Davis watched as Mrs. House lifted the mug to her lips. To her surprise, Mrs. House's hair began to change colour. The blonde started turning a vibrant blue. Mrs. Davis stood watching, her mouth open and her heart racing. Oh, I needed that. It was delicious, smiled Mrs. House sweetly. Okay, so I've got to the end of my resolution. They've passed on that lost product, those lost tea bags, back to the owner. who has no idea still what is happening. I would like you to have a go at writing the end of your resolution now for me. You need to include some inverted commas for that speech. Remembering, if it's a new speaker, you need a new line. If you want an extra challenge, see if you can put that action in after your speech like I did at the beginning. And you also need to try and include a fronted adverbial as well. Please send me your stories when you've written them so I can have a read of your fantastic paragraphs.